Prosecutors Podcast is brought to you by Progressive. Progressive helps you compare direct auto rates from a variety of companies so you can find a great one, even if it's not with them. Quote today at progressive.com to find a rate that works with your budget. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations.
Jennifer Harris disappeared from Bonham, Texas on Mother's Day 2002. The secrets in the Jennifer Harris case have been hidden for 20 years.
When someone disappears, you have to look at who would benefit from their disappearance.
What happened to Jennifer Harris, and who is responsible for her death? Coming May 10th, Final Days on Earth, Season 2, The Life and Death of Jennifer Harris. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, a promising young geologist disappears into the Arizona desert. Where is Daniel Robinson? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my jubilant co-host, Alice.
Hi, Brett. Jubilant. Is it because we went strawberry picking today? I invited you, but you did not show up. It's hard not to be jubilant when you're picking delicious strawberries.
It's really my loss. I went by the farmer's market on Friday, actually, and picked up some strawberries, and they were some of the best strawberries I've had. So I'm sure the strawberries that you picked with your own hands were probably fantastic.
Well, I mean, pro tip for anyone out there who's not been strawberry picking, it's like the perfect activity for little kids because unlike orchards, you know, pears, apples, peaches, other things. Wow, I sounded like you. And I just sounded like you saying peaches. Those are too high for kids to like pick, but strawberries, they're right about ankle level. And so even little hands can pick strawberries.
You know, it's such a great trick that the farmers of America have pulled on us because now not only do they not have to pay someone to pick the strawberries, but you will pay to go and pick the strawberries. It's like amazing.
And I loved it. I love paying for my own labor. I knew exactly where I got it.
I think the last time we went picking blueberries with you, did we do blueberries?
I made you go pick blueberries with me. Those were harder to pick.
Those are harder to pick, but it was great. I mean, I ate blueberries I made lots of blueberry pancakes. I'll say that. It was very good.
Delicious.
So there you go. Spring has sprung. It's almost summer. Hope everybody's out there enjoying their strawberries or blueberries or whatever it is that you like to pay to pick in your community, wherever you are. But Alice and I, we have a new story today. It's an interesting one. It's an important one. It's a sad story in a lot of ways, and it's one that is relatively new. It's one where you can make a difference. That is something we really like to do. We like to do the historical ones. We like to do the famous cases, the big cases. But when there are cases where people out there listening might actually have an answer or might actually be able to help, I mean, those are the cases we really enjoy looking at. And this is one of them, the case of Daniel Robinson. This is a case that has been highly recommended to us. I want to thank Hannah and others who have recommended this topic. Just to reiterate, we're always looking for new cases to do. We're always listening to the emails you guys send us, and it's important to us that the cases we cover are cases that are important to you, and this is one that definitely needs more coverage.
Absolutely, Brett. You know, this case sounds, unfortunately, like a lot of cases that we have covered before where car accident happens, person missing. But when you start digging into this case, your mind is just going to be boggled. Even in Shooting the Breeze before we were recording, both of us were just asking questions nonstop because this case has so many interesting rabbit holes isn't even the right word because I think they're directly connected. I don't think they're tangential. And there are just so many question marks.
Yeah, this is one where I would definitely tell people to keep an open mind. I go into a lot of these cases and sort of my way, I don't know how you handle it, Alice, but my way of avoiding cognitive bias is just to embrace it. So I look at these cases and within, I don't know, 30 minutes, an hour of starting to research a case, I have already decided what I think the answer probably is because I just want to accept that. I don't want to act like I don't have some sort of bias. I want to know what it is going in so then I can challenge that with the evidence that I'm seeing. And a lot of times I change my mind. A lot of times the sort of preconceived notion that I go in does not end up being the conclusion that I come to at the end. And this is the case. I'll just go ahead and lay it out for you guys. When I first heard about this case, I thought it was going to be pretty straightforward. Person gets into a car accident, probably has some sort of head injury, wanders off into the wilderness, into the desert in this case, and they're probably still out there. One day their body will be found, straightforward, clear cut, Occam's razor, all that jazz. That's going to be the story. Doesn't make it any less tragic that it's straightforward. Doesn't mean it shouldn't be solved. Doesn't mean we shouldn't focus on it until we do solve it. But that's what I sort of thought this case would end up being. And then the more I looked into it and talking to Daniel's dad, who's absolutely committed to finding out what happened to his son, and comparing what he was telling me to what I was reading in reports and what Alice and I have seen in the news and everything else, there is something about this case, and I can't quite put my finger on it. And I'm hoping just as we talk about it, that it'll become a little bit clearer to me exactly what it is. But there's something about this case that's strange. So listen to this one with a critical mind, and I would say an open mind, because I just feel like there's something a little weird going on in this case. Now, for those of you who don't know who Daniel Robinson is, we'll give you a little bit of background. This is another one of those that you wish had been covered a little bit more, but frankly hasn't. I feel like it's also another one which sort of was hovering around the Gabby Petito case. We talked about the Moab murders. This is another case where I actually heard about it, once again, in connection to Gabby Petito, in that the Gabby Petito case was so big, and one of the criticisms of that case was maybe the media was ignoring some other similar cases. And this is one that came up. The timing is similar. We're going to take you not too far back to June of 2021, June 23rd to be precise. Daniel Robinson, who is the person we've been talking about, he was a young man with the world in front of him. He was a scientist. He had graduated from the College of Charleston with a degree in geology. He'd grown up in South Carolina with his family. It's a fairly big family. And he had gone to school with the idea of being a scientist, of being someone who worked out in the field. And that was what he wanted to do. And he had managed to accomplish these things despite being born without most of his right arm. But he hadn't let that or anything else stop him. He'd moved to Arizona. He actually had to take one last class in the field to get his degree, and it had taken him to Phoenix. And while he was there, he landed the job that he would hold for the next 2 years. He started off in Phoenix, then he moved to Tempe, which is pretty close to Phoenix. And while he was in Arizona, he started a promising career with Matrix World Engineering. Arizona, as a lot of you know, is one of those places that has a lot of natural gas. It has a lot of oil. And there are these fields sort of outside of the city where a lot of that, there are these drilling sites where a lot of that happens. And obviously geologists are very important for that job. He was a hydrologist. Hydrology, oil. I don't really understand how all it works, but it all is important. So those of you out there.
As a former Texan where a lot of this industry takes place, geologists work hand in hand with a lot of these oil and gas companies and engineering companies. And so they all kind of get a sense of what they do. You have the folks who are actually out there drilling, but your geologists, your hydrologists, your engineers, and your scientists who are making sure all of the right physics and engineering is going on behind the scenes to make it safe to drill are on site often. And you obviously do not drill in the middle of, say, a city or anywhere that people live, but rather it's pretty remote out there. And it's not uncommon for the entire team who works on these types of projects to be out in the field in the middle of nowhere to make sure that the project goes off without a hitch. So even if Daniel is not the one operating the particular project or needs to be on the actual site, he, as the geologist, the hydrologist, would be out there to oversee or to see face to face, the things that he's making sure works.
There you go. Alice bringing the expertise. Alice has expertise in many things and understands this a little bit better than I do, but that's exactly right. And it is a job that takes him out to the site, and that is something that he wanted. He loved the outdoors. He loved hiking. He loved the desert. He was constantly trying to encourage the rest of his family to move out to Arizona. He loved it so much. In fact, his sister eventually would move to Phoenix. And you got to think, he's 24 years old. He probably thought that the world was in front of him, and it should have been. But then, in a mystery that defies explanation, Daniel disappeared, leaving his father and his family and more people who have become involved in this case desperate to find him. Alice, summer is upon us, and I can't wait to get back outside and start grilling again. I love to throw a steak on the grill and enjoy that nice medium rare ribeye, and that's where ButcherBox is coming in for me this summer. You can choose from a carefully curated selection of 100% grass-fed beef, free-range organic chicken, wild-caught seafood, and more. And right now, new subscribers can receive a free grilling bundle in their first order. Just what you need to get your grilling on track. One of my favorite cuts of meat from ButcherBox is the ribeye. And let me tell you, I got a butcher just down the road, and what you get from ButcherBox is just as good as what you'll get from them, and the price is so much better.
Brett, my boys love ButcherBox so much that when it comes in the mail every month, they actually cheer for the box like it's Christmas. And that's what's so great. ButcherBox ships a curated selection of high-quality meats right to your home. Free shipping for the continental U.S., and the meats have no antibiotics or added hormones, and they're packed fresh and shipped frozen for your convenience, so you can save time on your next grocery store trip. You can customize your own box or go with one of theirs. Either way, you get exactly what you want, and that's high quality meat, which is delicious 100% grass-fed beef, free-range chicken, pork raised, crate-free, and wild-caught seafood. It really is an unbeatable value at less than $6 per meal on average. So kick off your grilling season right with ButcherBox. Sign up at butcherbox.com/prosecute to receive a free grilling bundle in your first order. You'll get 2 10-ounce ribeyes, 5 pounds of chicken drumsticks, and a pack of burgers for free. That's butcherbox.com/prosecute to claim this deal. The Prosecutors Podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy.
All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate. and their tool provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at Progressive.com to join the over 27 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Brett, let's dive into the timeline because obviously we know so little about what happened right around the time he disappeared. Let's find out more about who Daniel was and what led him to his ultimate disappearance. In 2019, Daniel moves from South Carolina, where he'd received a degree in geology at the College of Charleston, to Phoenix, Arizona. He takes a job as a staff hydrologist at Matrix World Engineering, which is headquartered in Phoenix. He'll work there until his disappearance, as we've already noted. He later moves to Tempe, where he lived alone, although his sister Davisha lived in Phoenix. Arizona was perfect for Daniel, like we've already told you. He loved the outdoors, hiking, taking long trips over the rough desert terrain. Between his personal passions and his job, he was used to the Arizona desert. He was no stranger to it whatsoever. On June 6th, Daniel begins a job working in the desert of Arizona north of the town of Buckeye. And about a week later, on June 12th, Daniel, who also works as an Instacart deliverer, meets a woman during a delivery. They exchange numbers, and Daniel apparently is optimistic that something will come of this. But by June 22nd, the woman, her name was Caitlin, has made it clear that she did not want to have a relationship with him. So I don't think this is that unusual. Daniel is young. He's just graduated from college. He's working his first job. Because he has no family, immediate family, or children, or a spouse, or a significant other at this time, it seems totally normal that he would maybe try to make some extra money on the side as something like an Instacart deliverer. I guess it's not every day that you meet someone on your deliveries to want to exchange numbers with. But again, he's young. He's a good-looking guy. And, this isn't that different from, say, Tinder, except you actually get to do it in person to exchange numbers.
I feel like this speaks to how outgoing he must have been, because I can't imagine meeting a woman as a delivery driver. I would be so shy. You don't think of me as shy, but I would be. I would give the food and go. So he must have been very outgoing and charming, that in that sort of very brief transactional relationship, he was able to make an impression on somebody.
Yeah, I can see a really big personality, right? Because you're Instacart deliverer. Most of the time, you don't even see the person face to face. And if you do, it's a matter of minutes. It's for them to unload the car. I'm thinking of pre-pandemic times. I would help my Instacart deliverer unload the groceries, but we would barely speak. And then I'd go back into the house and they would drive away. So he's making such a big impression in a matter of minutes to this woman that she's willing to give him her number. And I kind of love this little peek into who Daniel is, because in just kind of that short time, he's a loving, kind of joyful, grab life by the horns kind of person, in the sense that even with this short interaction, he's optimistic about the relationship, and he's willing to tell others that he's optimistic about it, as opposed to being private, closed in, and, reticent to dive into relationships. So this just speaks to kind of the exciting, fun-loving guy that he is. On June 16th, Daniel talks to a friend named Antonio. Antonio said he was more hyper than usual, and that he told him he hooked up with a girl he met delivering for Instacart. From June 18th through the 20th, a friend of Daniel's, Luke, comes to visit. He will later report that Daniel seemed normal, but he told him he was glad he'd visited because he'd been feeling depressed. A couple days later, on June 22nd, Daniel's friend Ruben calls him. He wants to discuss places to visit in Arizona, but he says that Daniel seems off. He says he seemed down and like something was on his mind. I'd just like to note, in a pretty short span of time, in about a week, it looks like Daniel is really well connected and probably a good friend to his friends. In a span of about a week, he is talking to or visiting with 3 different friends, if not more. These are just the ones who knew him well enough to be able to talk about his state of mind and whether it was the same or different than what they were used to with Daniel. But he's not a hermit. He doesn't, even though he lives by himself in kind of a remote part of the country, he is not a closed off person with no connections to the outside world. In fact, he's quite connected to the outside world. By outside world, I just mean these projects can be in very remote places and it can seem like there's nothing around. That same day, on June 22nd, Daniel texts his sister that he has an emergency, though he does not describe what it is. He does not respond to repeated calls or texts from his sister, and his sister will later tell his father that she and Daniel had an emergency code that Daniel had sent her that night. When she did eventually talk to him, he said he was just testing her to see how quickly she would react. At 6:02 p.m., Daniel goes to the Waffle House and has dinner. Police spoke to the waitress who served Daniel, and she knew him from previous encounters and told police that he was off that night. He was skittish, and unlike most times, he would not talk to her.
So like Alice said, we've covered this sort of week-long period, maybe a little bit more, leading up to June 23rd, which, as we mentioned earlier, is the day that Daniel is going to disappear. And when you think about these disappearances, whenever you're looking at a missing person, there's a lot you can tell from the day of. But I think it's always important to go back in time because, as we have said 1,000 times, whenever someone disappears, there are always people who believe that there is something else going on. Either that person had planned to disappear, run off and start their new life. And I'll just go ahead and tell you there's a tweak to that, which is interesting in this case, which we'll get to in a bit. Or that there's something going on with them that leads to their disappearance, that the events that happened the day of actually are just the culmination of something. And so you want to kind of look back and see, is there anything unusual going on? And what do we see here? So far, we've seen this beginnings of relationship with this woman. How significant that is or isn't, who knows? All of us in our dating lives have had dates that didn't work out, or we met people and a week later we never talked to them again. And if any of us had disappeared right afterwards, maybe somebody would have thought that was significant, even if it wasn't, right? So we don't know how significant that is. We'll talk more about that as we go, but something to remember. But then in that same time frame, you also have all these friends who are coming into his life for one reason or another. And as Alice said, Daniel is not the kind of person. He's not a loner. He's not somebody who doesn't know anyone. Go back to Maura Murray, one of the earliest cases that we did. One of the problems you really have in the Maura Murray case is while she was at nursing school, she wasn't close to anybody. There just weren't that many people from her time at Amherst and UMass that could really speak to her and her mindset and what she was thinking. There just weren't many people who could give you any insight into anything. Not the case with Daniel. Daniel has lots of friends, and there are people who care about him and people who talk to him. He's talking to his dad throughout this time, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And all of them are saying there's something going on. There's something off. There's something strange. There's something on his mind. Even the Waffle House waitress is saying that. He does this thing with his sister where he sends her this emergency code, and you wonder, why would he do that then? Why would he feel now is the time to test her, assuming it was a test, to see about her reaction? Is this a sign of some sort of latent mental problem coming to the fore? Is it a sign of something he's concerned about? Either something that is a true threat or is something in his mind that's giving him this sense of paranoia. It's hard to say, but it's interesting that all these things are happening leading up to the day he is going to disappear seemingly into nowhere. So that all brings us to Wednesday, June 23rd, 2021, the day that Daniel is going to disappear. And this is obviously an important day, and it's a day we're going to spend a lot of time on. It starts at 7 a.m. Daniel drives to a Shell station, and he makes some purchases. Now, there's an interesting thing about this. There is a police report in this case. It's pretty lengthy, and it has been made available to the public. We are going to post it on our website if you want to read it, and it gives you a lot of information on this case. There's not a lot blacked out of that report. There are names and addresses, the kind of things you would expect to protect people's privacy. When you look at the Shell station, one thing that is blacked out is what Daniel bought at the Shell station, which I find to be pretty interesting. So we don't actually know what purchases he made. We know that he made some purchases while he was there other than gas, but we don't know what they were.
Yeah, but that's so interesting because there are so many reasons to redact a report. It's hold back evidence, it's ongoing investigation, it could reveal something private. There are many reasons that you can redact, and it's not clear how something so seemingly innocuous as things you can buy in a gas station can trigger something that would require redaction. I'm not saying it shouldn't be redacted, but rather that's very interesting because there's only so many things you can buy at a gas station.
So if you look at the report, basically it tells you that the police have Daniel's bank account information. And it notes that he made purchases at this Shell station in Buckeye. And it says, among the charges, the following may be of value. And then everything's blacked out. So we don't know what those charges are or why they may be of value, but it's interesting. It may mean nothing, but it's interesting that that is something the police chose to black out. And we talked about before, hold back evidence. And maybe for some reason, the police, who, spoiler alert, don't really think there's foul play involved here, maybe this is something they're holding back just in case there is. It may be something where for some reason they think that those charges are somehow significant or might be significant if this ever becomes a criminal investigation. But we don't know exactly what he purchased other than gasoline. What we do know is that while he was there at the gas station, he did buy gas. And in fact, he bought a whopping $3.83 worth of gas, which last year might have gotten you a gallon. I will tell you, this year, it would not.
I think what we know from these charges, though, is that his purpose of going to the gas station is likely not to fill up on gas. He probably topped himself off because he happened to be there, but it sounds like the purpose of his trip was to buy whatever has been blacked out on his charges.
And look, is it important? I have no idea. It may not be important, but I think Alice is right. He went to the Shell station for some reason other than gas. He certainly didn't need $3.83 of gas in his SUV, but that's what he bought. Who knows? What we do know is that 22 minutes later at 7:22 a.m., Daniel arrives at a work site in Laredo, Arizona, and this is a work site that was a place he'd been before. Interestingly, we know that he takes photos of work logs before leaving. It is unclear exactly why he did this. It's also unclear where Daniel goes at this point. And this is something that's going to become important. We have the black box report from Daniel's car, which means we know his odometer readings at various points in time. So, we know, for instance, that between 7:22 a.m. and 8:35, Daniel had driven about 20 miles. So, in over an hour, he'd driven about 20 miles. It's unclear exactly where he went. It's unclear why that would have taken him an hour and 13 minutes, but that's what he did. We know then at that point, he drives another 17 miles to his work site that we're going to talk about in a minute. The total distance, by the way, from the Laredo work site to the work site closer to Buckeye is about 23 miles. So we know that he drove 37 miles. We don't know where those other 14 miles were. Maybe he took back roads. Maybe he took the scenic route. I don't know. I mean, these are the kind of things that wouldn't be that important were it not the day he disappeared. But because it's the day he disappeared, everything becomes important.
You know, what is interesting about it is we saw from the days leading up to June 23rd, that many of his friends have come forward to talk about conversations they had with him, whether it was in person or over the phone. And so it sounds like his friends are really wanting to help. They're connected with him and have conversations. But so far as we know, no one has come forward and said that Daniel came and visited them, in this kind of 7:30 a.m. hour, which is a relatively early hour in general. People are usually waking up, getting to work, that sort of thing.
I don't know. And we're going to see more of this. We're going to see more instances where there's time and miles driven that don't really add up. So this is just the first instance of this on this day. What we do know is that around 9 a.m., Daniel arrives at his work site north of Buckeye, Arizona, which is off of the Sun Valley Parkway. Now, it's important to note that Daniel has never been to this particular work site before, and in fact, he needed to ask for directions in order to get to the site. So this is not a place that he knew well. It's not a place he could drive to in his sleep or anything like that. This is a new place for him. Now, interestingly, a storm cell is passing through. Daniel works outside. If it's storming all day, there's not a lot of work that he can do. And one thing he does is he goes to speak to another worker, a guy named Ken, while they waited for the storm to pass. Now, Ken actually works for another company at the site. I guess that company and the company that Daniel worked for are working together. As Alice said, not that unusual. A lot of different people working for one purpose for a lot of companies, sharing the profits. They're waiting for the storm to pass through, and Ken is somewhat surprised by some of the things Daniel says to him. And later, Ken will say that nothing really made sense to him, and I think it's because Ken was missing some information. But what Daniel said is he asked Ken if he thought maybe he should just go back to Phoenix and rest because he was tired. And Ken didn't really understand that because it's 9 o'clock in the morning and he's already tired. It didn't make sense to Ken. But what he didn't know is Daniel had actually worked at Instacart until late the night before, and he was probably exhausted. He probably didn't get a lot of sleep. As we know, at 7 o'clock, he's at the Shell. So if he'd worked late the night before, there wasn't a lot of sleep in between working and getting ready to go to work. Whatever the case may be, after about 15 minutes, Daniel sort of waves goodbye to Ken and leaves the work site, apparently heading home. Now, Ken, he doesn't understand what's going on here. He doesn't know why Daniel's leaving. This is unusual for Daniel. Daniel is known as a very hard worker, a very conscientious worker, not the kind of person who would just leave in the middle of the day. And Ken just doesn't think that this storm sale was going to last long enough to justify closing down the work site for the day. And he will eventually call his supervisor, a man named Steve, to let him know what was happening and that Daniel had left.
Yeah, I can see why Ken would be confused by this conversation, especially, and that's hard to know whether it's just because Ken doesn't have context, or if Daniel was just speaking so unclear, confusedly. Because we have more context to understand what Daniel's saying, but I can understand from Ken's perspective. If someone I typically work very professionally with and is a good worker and not ever confused, starts saying things like, hey, asking my advice, should I go home and rest? And, my immediate thought is, it's the workday. What are you talking about? And then to walk off at the very beginning of the day, workday, is a strange thing that Daniel hasn't done before, which is why it's strange.
And it's a good point you make, Alice. I mean, Ken's the kind of witness you want to have on the one hand, because there's no reason to think he's not telling us the absolute truth. He's not somebody who's in any way involved with Daniel. He has no reason to lie. So you feel like whatever he tells you, to the extent that it's consistent with all the problems we've talked about before with people's memory and everything else, is going to be relatively accurate. But it is the case that Ken is the only person who has any interaction with Daniel. So maybe if it had been someone else who knew Daniel better, the perception that we would get would be a little bit different. It wouldn't be, this is weird, because And I think this is so important. I'm glad you pointed this out. There is so much that we're going to talk about that has been contextualized by the police or by the media as weird, right? Daniel was being weird. So he was on the work site. He's weird. He's saying all the things that don't make any sense. And when you hear that, you automatically think, oh, well, something's going on. Maybe he's having some sort of mental break. Maybe he's like off his meds or something, or maybe he's on drugs. All these things run through your head. Possibilities. Why he would be doing that, why he would be sounding like that. But what if that fundamental principle, that very first thing that we hear is wrong? What if he wasn't actually sounding weird? It was just that Ken didn't get what he meant. And if that's true, and Daniel's not acting strange, and it's not that he's not making sense, it's just Ken didn't have enough information to understand, it completely changes your perception of what's going on here. And we just don't know. All we have is what Ken said. We know that Ken was concerned. Ken was concerned enough to call his supervisor, and he's about to take even more actions we're going to talk about in a minute. This happens at about 9 a.m. At 12:54, we get another reading from Daniel's onboard computer. It's going to take another odometer reading, and it indicates that 23.6 miles have been covered in the 4 hours since Daniel left the work site. And it also indicates that at this point, at 12:54 p.m., there is an accident of some sort, and this accident is going to be pretty significant.
Again, 4 hours is a long time to pass, especially when it's only about 23.6 miles. About the same distance, to Verado, where he had previously come from. We don't know if that's where he was going, but it's interesting that he doesn't get very far, especially when we see where he ultimately ends up.
Right. I mean, we thought when he drove from 722 to 835, he drove 20 miles. And that seemed like a long time to pass to only cover 20 miles. And now we have 4 hours passing, and he only covers 23.6. So, yeah.
And it's helpful to note that where he's driving is really the middle of nowhere. There's not going to be a lot of traffic. This is not an urban area where you're sitting in traffic for a long time. You can drive fast and get places quickly in the desert. And so this is not a matter of being in rush hour or being stuck in a downtown area with lots of one-way streets. At 3 p.m. that day, Ken is told that no one has been able to find Daniel and that he's not answering his phone. Concerned, he drives into the desert on the dirt road in the direction Daniel was heading when he left, in the hopes that Ken can find him. Ken came to a T intersection, and he could see what he believed were the tire marks from Daniel's car heading west into a large desert area. Ken followed those car tracks, but despite his best efforts, he was unable to find Daniel. He went to a rise that looked out over the area, but he saw nothing of interest.
And I think it's important to contextualize where we're at. As Alice said earlier, this is an oil and gas industry. They're not doing this in the middle of the city. They're in the middle of nowhere. So we talk about roads. A lot of these roads are dirt roads. You have a main road that's sort of off here, but basically at some point you turn off what is a relatively small main road onto a gravel road, probably, that takes you to the site where this oil rig is operating. The roads that lead off from there are going to be dirt roads. I mean, they're barely roads at all. You're just in the middle of the desert. And Ken, he's following the direction that Daniel went, and he comes to this T intersection. And if you go one way, it takes you back to that road, the main road that would take you back towards Phoenix, towards Tempe. That is not the direction Daniel went. Daniel went the other direction, the direction that would take him deeper into the desert and more into the wilderness where, like I said, these aren't really roads. It's just dirt. It's just desert. It's just sand that you're driving on as you are heading off into nowhere.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brett. The fact that, as Ken's driving, he doesn't know for a fact those tracks are Daniel's car tracks, but this is so remote and there's no roads. There's just only really off-roading essentially, that if he saw those tracks and there's no one out here, there's no reason for anyone else to be out here except at the work site, and everyone else is at work. He makes a very good guess that these are in fact Daniel's car tracks. Again, that shows you how remote we are here. One set of tracks, if I saw them on the street where I live, I would not know whose car that was at all. But here, even though it's hours later, this set of car tracks, Ken believes them to be Daniel, and I think rightfully believes so. Now, at 7:04 p.m., Daniel's father, David Robinson, calls the police to report him missing. Officers talk to Ken, and several officers search for Daniel in the area where he was believed to have driven his car. There's some confusion here about what exactly the police were doing. Someone told David that he needed to wait 12 hours after Daniel was found to be missing before he could file an official report. Based on what Ken had said, that was determined to be 3 a.m. David called back at that point and reported Daniel missing. Other than officers going out to the site and to Daniel's home, no other searches are performed on June 23rd or June 24th. I think that's interesting because if I were looking at this case, and I would determine that the 12 hours started from 9 a.m. or about 9:15 whenever Daniel left the work site. But since Ken took that, layperson search around 3 o'clock, I guess they used that time period.
And we talked to Mr. Robinson, to David, about this, and this is something that really sticks with him to this day, that the police, they took a while to take this seriously. And as Alice said, you might think, well, let's pick the earliest time and do it. But the police, they very much were doing the thing where he's going to turn up. He's an adult. He's going to turn up. So 3 o'clock sounded good. Let's wait till 3 a.m. And I'm sure whoever said that was thinking he'll turn up. Between now and 3 a.m., he's going to call his dad, and this is going to resolve itself. And, we love the police here on the Prosecutors Podcast. We're very big police people here, but we're also willing to point out when the police have shortcomings. And we talked about this in the Jason Landry case. We talked about this in a lot of cases where we talked about this in the Moab case, where police often take what is most likely to happen and they base their reaction on that. So the most likely outcome for any missing persons report is that it will resolve itself. That is what usually happens. The most likely outcome for any car found on the side of the road is that the driver will appear on their own. A DUI walk-off usually just ends with the person who is the DUI coming back the next morning and getting their car. That's what usually happens. And so the police, being short-staffed and short on resources, react based on what's usually going to happen. And the problem is, when you look at this case, there were warning signs here. You had Ken, who, whether he was right or wrong, thought that Daniel was acting unusually that morning. You have Daniel, who's in an area that he doesn't know. He says he's going to go back to Phoenix. His tracks do not lead back to Phoenix. They lead into the desert. These are all signs that should have told the police this is a concerning missing person. This is not a standard one. This is one where something might have gone really wrong, and the earlier we get out there, the more likely we'll have a positive outcome. But they don't do that. They treat it like it's any other adult who hasn't talked to their parents in 12 hours, and now the parents are calling the police. And we lose at least a couple days because of that.
On June 25th, a helicopter search is conducted in the area of Daniel's disappearance, following up on ground searches. This is the first real day of searches. So like Brett mentioned, this is really 2 days later from the time that Daniel disappears, essentially in the morning of June 23rd. Now, more extensive searches will continue, but no trace of Daniel is found. So note, the helicopter is brought in because kind of the vastness of this area, and also because there are so few things dotting the landscape that from high up, from that vantage point, you're likely to spot a car or a person because there aren't buildings or trees really in the way. But they don't leave it just to the helicopter search. They also do the ground searches near where the tracks are.
And you have people who are on ATVs. You have cadaver dogs that are out there, search dogs. At this point, you do have sort of a real search, grid search going on in the area around Daniel's worksite in the last place he was found. And you would think if there was any evidence of Daniel in that area, you would find it, but the police don't.
Almost a month passes. July 19th, police do locate Daniel's blue 2017 Jeep Renegade less than 3 miles from his worksite. It's laying on its side in a ravine. Police helicopters had flown over the area, but apparently they missed the car. Daniel's clothes and belongings were found inside and around the SUV. The vehicle was still in drive. All the airbags were deployed. The police and his family continue to look for Daniel, but so far, they have found nothing. So basically, a month passes by in the area that they were searching, and so close to his work site, they find Daniel's car. This seems to be the wreck that occurred, but there's nothing that indicates that Daniel is there, is around there. It's been a while. Things may have happened, but there's no sign of him like we have found in other cases where we'll find remains of someone or an indication that they were hurt at the site. Here we have just nothing, and we still don't know where Daniel is.
And I gotta say, I find this to be almost inexplicable. This is the first thing that just really strikes me as strange. I mean, let's talk about the search here for a second. So Daniel goes missing. The police, they launch the search. It actually covers 70 square miles of desert. And it's all west of Daniel's worksite in the direction that he was driving at the time. As we said, you got searchers, you got dogs, you got drones, you got helicopters, you got all-terrain vehicles, all the things you would want. I mean, the police, it took them a few days, but once they engaged, right? They did all the things you would want them to do, and they find no sign of Daniel. And honestly, in those initial days when you find no sign of him, you got to start to think, if you're the police, he's not around there. He has gotten beyond the desert. Whatever happened to him has happened somewhere else. And that's frustrating because where do you look when your initial search area has sort of exhausted itself? But then a month later, as Alice said, they find the car. And it was actually a rancher. A rancher is out, surveying his land, and he finds Daniel's car. It's laying on its side. It's in a ravine, and it's less than 3 miles from his work site. I've seen between 2 miles and 4 miles. So we're going to say less than 3. Less than 3 from where he's last seen. Now, according to Daniel's father, not only had this area been searched, not only had the helicopter flown over this area, but the rancher who found it would later say that he had been to the area a few days before and there had been no vehicle. So what do we make of this? We've said 1,000 times before how difficult it is to find a body, and how often searches will cover areas where a body is eventually found, and how sometimes, unless you literally walk right over it, you're not even going to find a body. And how that's not that unusual. We're not talking about a body here. We're talking about an SUV. We're talking about a Jeep Renegade, a blue Jeep Renegade. We're going to post pictures of this online. I would advise you to take a look at this. What some people will occasionally say is, well, it was dark. It's a dark colored vehicle, so maybe you just wouldn't notice it. I'm sorry. If you look at this, it doesn't look like the rest of the terrain. It's in a ravine, sparse vegetation. There is vegetation, but it's pretty sparse. The vegetation is green. It is a dark color. It's metallic. If you're flying over that in a helicopter and your whole intention is you're searching the area, I honestly don't know how you miss it. I mean, I guess the simplest explanation is you did. that the drones missed it and the helicopter missed it, and that none of the ATVs or the searchers or the dogs went anywhere near it. They were in the ravine over, and so they just didn't see it. Though in a grid search, this is a grid that should have been searched. I don't know how you miss this. I don't know how you miss it.
Yeah, it's a really large object to miss. Again, it's not like a body. And if you look at this, it's kind of, it is clearly in an awkward position that you would not mistake in this car to be a car that is okay, that is parked, that was meant to be left there. It is clear that something has gone wrong with this car because of the way it's positioned. It's like teetering in the ravine on its side with windows blasted out. And obviously a car is much larger than a person. And if you look at this picture of the car, you'll see that it's really just desert around it. There's some brush, but it's low-lying brush, just like you would find in the desert. A lot of the vegetation in a desert climate is low to the ground so that they can soak up all the water. Whenever there's rainfall, they don't have to expend the energy to send water to outer limbs. And so the car is not at all buried in vegetation, and it stands out because the terrain looks like desert. Think of browns and grays and kind of that dry look, whereas the car is clearly metal and a dark blue that is not natural and doesn't naturally blend in to the surroundings. The other thing to note is what Daniel's clothes were the day that are left behind. It's also not kind of brown clothes that could blend in. One of the pieces of clothes that's left behind, I think, is like bright orange, almost like a life vest color, like a safety vest. Oh, it's his safety. It is literally his safety vest from work, which is meant to be seen from far away on a work site so that you can stay safe, since a human could blend in, to the surroundings. But it is something that should catch anyone's eyes, even from a distance, in this type of a terrain. So,
and I'll say something else about this. We keep saying ravine. Many of you are imagining sort of a deep ravine with maybe a sort of like sheer rock walls, and it's down in the ravine, and so maybe you missed it. That is not the kind of ravine we're talking about here. This is more of a wash. It's more of a creek. It's like a slight depression. I would advise you to take a look at this. Like I said, we're going to post it on the website. If you're watching on YouTube, you're seeing it right now. It's not such that if you were looking at it from above, you might not see it. Honestly, if you can't see this, I don't know what the point of a helicopter search is. Just like keep the helicopter at home and save the gas money, because this should have been seen from above if you search this area.
Right. And let's put it this way. The ravine is not really a ravine. You could hop it on your own 2 feet. It's not even so wide that the car lengthwise could fit in it. The car is like a bridge across this ditch. Essentially, it's a ditch. And that's how shallow the quote-unquote ravine is.
One of the theories is that the vehicle was actually attempting to go up the side and over when the wreck happened. And you can totally see how that would be the case, because this is not a very deep thing. Like Alice said, it's more like a ditch, and it's just sort of in this area. And like I said, I would just say, take a look at it, and you can decide for yourself. Totally possible it was missed. That happens. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's certainly not definitive that nobody saw it and that something unusual is going on here, but it's a big miss. It's a big miss. It's a big miss by the search team. And when you combine that with some of the other things we're going to talk about, you can understand why people look askance at this case and think maybe there's just something a little bit more going on here than your typical case.
And another thing to know, and I don't know how well traveled this area is, because you really can't drive your own paths, right? There are roads, but there's also, since there's nothing out there, if you're adventurous, you can drive off-road. This is only 3 miles from a work site. There is nothing out here essentially except for the work site. The work site, while it's being worked on, is busy in the sense that you have people coming to and from the work site, because you don't usually live on the work site, since there is nowhere to live on the work site. It is just set up for the very purpose of whatever you are digging, drilling, engineering. And so you have constant traffic right in the vicinity of where this car was. Of course, you can stay on the roads and perhaps miss this car, but this is actually the fact that it's so close to the work site also surprises me that all the traffic going in and out of the work site, no one saw it in the almost month that the car went undetected.
So we're going to go ahead and stop there. There's so much more to talk about in this case. This is definitely a case that deserves a couple of episodes. I think you guys can already see how this is a weird one. And the fact that it's weird and it has some quirky stuff doesn't mean there's not a simple explanation. I'm not trying to say that, but there are things about this case that are going to make you think, and we're really going to get into those next time. We've already given you sort of a taste of some of the unusual stuff going on here, but I think by the time we finish with the next episode, you'll sort of understand why there are people who really question what's going on here. I do want to say a couple things. Those of you who live in Arizona, or even if you don't, Daniel is described as a 5'8" black man weighing 165 pounds with black hair, brown eyes, and he is missing part of his right forearm, including his hand. A $10,000 reward is being offered by Daniel's family for information that can bring him home. If you have any information, please go to pleasehelpfinddaniel.com or call the tip line at 844-602-0660. This is a family who is working constantly to bring Daniel home, and hopefully we can do everything we can to bring them some answers. We're always looking forward to your thoughts. If you have any thoughts on this case, or if you have any information on this case, feel free to shoot us an email at prosecutorspod@gmail.com, at prosecutorspod for Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Hello if you're watching on YouTube, and I hope you're enjoying your ad-free episodes on Patreon. I do want to say that we have recently passed our 2-year anniversary. Happy anniversary, Alice.
Oh, happy anniversary, Brett. I'm sorry I didn't get you anything.
I forget what the 2-year anniversary is. I feel like the first year anniversary is like paper or something
It's
like
the
that.
2-year
right?
podcast anniversary, drinking a lot of alcohol and recording at 11 p.m. on a Saturday night.
I think that is. I think that's what the 2-year anniversary is. So I'm glad we celebrated in style.
We don't have a problem. We also don't have other friends, so.
It's true. It's true. We just have each other, and that's all we need. That's all we need.
This is true.
Okay. Well, Alice, do you have anything else you want to say before we sign off for tonight?
Guys, the story has not even started. The kind of unusual aspects of this case, you've gotten a hint of it. It's the tip of the iceberg, but it gets stranger and stranger. And I think once we discuss them in the next episode, you'll understand why we told you to keep an open mind in this case.
See, Going West Pod did this in like 50 minutes. So, like I said, like us,
we chat
no
too
chit-chat.
much.
We do. It's too much chitting and chatting, but that's what we do.
Chitting sounds weird. There we go, chitting and chatting.
Chitting and chatting again, yeah. All right. Well, Alice, we'll be back next week with more on this case. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. I started listening to Going West podcast because I was sick and I had this dream, and it was just so weird because it was literally the two of them doing a podcast episode about why I was sick.
That's
it was
so
strange.
sad. You must have been so
I know.
delirious. What did you
I
have?
guess I was totally delirious. I have no idea.
You know,
I mean,
like
it's a
a
good
bunch
podcast,
of people got.
so.
I'm really glad that your illness was narrated by Going West, but I'm sorry you were sick.
They're kind of like us, but less chatty.
Oh,
That's sort of-
we are so chatty.
I know. I think when people hate our show, I'm going to be like, go listen to Going West. They're like us. They're less
I
chatty.
guess. What if they just don't like us?
forgive me. I've had quite a bit to drink, so it's going to be interesting. We'll just have to see how this goes.
You're incredibly lucid, and I'm so glad I waited until like really late to text you so that you could not be responsible. And I'm sorry, you don't have to be recording right now. I just had said it yesterday, and I was like, I didn't follow up.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
I mean,
Let's
this is
do it.
going to be a
I've
fun
got
episode.
I've got a beer. I'm good.
It's going to be a fun episode.